Welcome to the Tarryn Reeves Show, where your journey to empowerment takes center stage. I'm your host, Tarryn Reeves, best-selling author and publishing expert. Together, we'll dive into the hearts and minds of visionaries, disruptors, and trailblazing leaders to explore the most compelling and thought-provoking ideas in life, business, and marketing. Let's inspire, impact, and ignite. This is the Tarryn Reeves Show. Today, I'm joined by Kylee. She is a founder and chief vision officer of Elements for Success. She's a global organization focused on helping individuals and teams achieve meaningful transformation. Kylee was inspired by Earl Nightingale's idea of success as the progressive realization of a worthy goal. Kylee empowers people of all ages to develop the confidence and tools they need to live purposefully. With a background in education, a death stare of a student principal, and collaboration with mental health professionals, she's dedicated to fostering lasting behavior change and guiding others toward personal and professional excellence. Please welcome Kylee Leota.
Oh, thank you, Tarryn. I'm overwhelmed by my introduction today.
You're pretty fabulous. And as mums, we've got to have that death stare honed in.
Oh, absolutely.
No words required. It's the mum stare and then followed by the mum voice, and then you know you're in trouble.
Absolutely.
Now, Kylee, you talk about this thing called infinite leadership. What does it mean to be an infinite leader, especially in today's world? And how does it differ from, I'm going to say, traditional leadership?
First of all, in Australia, I didn't get any leadership training until I'd become a leader. I think we kind of do it quite backwards here. I'm sure in other areas of the world as well. But that was part of it. Then I'd go to this leadership training. The few opportunities I got, it would be very focused on educational leadership, for example, because I was in education at the time. It didn't really felt like there was not a lot of application to outside of this particular context. And in this world, we know that people have post-COVID gone, I actually don't have to stay here anymore. But what happens is we learn a skill in a particular environment, and then we go to a different environment. And we don't necessarily replicate that skill that we need over here. Or even we've learned a particular style and we can't replicate that. The concept of infinite leadership is being able to reflect, review, and recalibrate in every age and stage of where you are, whether that be personally or professionally. And the idea is that infinite learning equals infinite opportunities and infinite possibilities. And each of the letters in infinite stands for its own pillar. So for the big visionary people that like the big picture of infinite, which starts with identity, nurturing, fearlessness, innovation, nobility, influence, transformation, and ecosystem, see it as a big picture. But some people really need it to be smaller. And I need to focus on one area at a time. And I need to have one goal that focuses my energy. So the concept of infinite leadership is really around adaptability to your style and meeting where you are at in alignment with Earl Nightingale's quote about it's a progressive realization of what success looks like for you, whether that be leadership in terms of self-leadership in your own life personally, or whether it be leadership in your organization, or whether it be the organization as a whole in terms of where that goes. Anyone can apply this infinite leadership model to move yourself from where you are now to where you want to be in the future, whether you're starting out in your journey going, I think I want to be a leader, or you're an aspiring leader, you're looking into what that looks like. Or whether you're already a leader and just not moving as fast and you need to recalibrate, or you're looking for those promotional positions. So it meets everybody at that different ages because it's an ongoing reflective practice that you keep repeating and leveling up in that infinite symbol, but almost going up in the air. Like as you're going, it's that ongoing evolution of self.
I can see how important something like this is for long-term success because you're absolutely right. Like having come out of corporate myself, you learn these skills in one organization, then you're thrown into something that's culturally completely different. Some just don't know what to do. From what you just said, it appears to me that infinite leadership and leadership in general is a skill that you can learn and develop over time. Is that right?
For sure. And I think the other part is when we think of leadership, we think a lot about leading others, but it always starts with self. Because if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others. We've got to start with self and look at what do I need to get to the next phase? Because we know that one of the hugest skills in leadership is modeling the way. So what am I modeling right now in my communication? What am I modeling right now in terms of how we problem solve, how we innovate, how we move through fears. We've got massive change coming into the organization. What's my approach to that? And how am I navigating emotional intelligence? All of those things. So start with
Yeah.
self to infinitely lead others on that journey. And that's how we're going to get that excellence. Infinite leadership is around focusing on that continuous improvement model and idea, but it's about creating excellence for everybody, not just me, not just you, but for everybody in the room. And because collectively we'll rise and get better outcomes if we can do that together.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely starts with leadership of self, because we've all had those bosses or been around those people, even in our personal life, who say one thing and then model another. And that just erodes trust. It erodes authority. And that's just not leadership. That's not what we think
Right.
of when we think about leadership. It feels unsafe because we're naturally hardwired to be part of a pack. And when things are being done two different ways, it's a bit like, I don't feel safe. And then that triggers all of the flow on effect through your nervous system, through all of the things.
Yeah, because of the uncertainty, you're saying one thing, but you're doing another thing. So which one's actually true and which one should I follow? Saying it's okay for out of a lunch break. You're saying go and take a lunch break, but then you never have a lunch break. And sometimes it's those micro behaviors. It's not the big stuff even. It's those micro things. You say take time for your well-being, but then you send emails at 11 o'clock at night. Which one is actually true? Which one am I supposed to follow through on?
Yeah. And some of that realization, I think, happens on a subconscious level. That example that you just gave, I think we do notice. Now, I love that the word infinite for you has been broken down into pillars. I'd love to dive into one or two sentence paragraph breakdown of each of those pillars.
Absolutely. I could talk about this stuff all day. See series 7, 8, 9 of this podcast. So the first pillar is identity, which is that self-realization. And there's actually an African leadership person that his name's Vusi Thembekwayo. And he said that identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. That's so powerful is we can get stuck in this identity of who we become in a role. Or I'm the guy that does this, or I'm the girl that does this, or in personal life, I'm the single mum narrative that I talk about. I left corporate, so I couldn't cut it in corporate. That's an identity that someone might have bestowed upon me with a flyaway comment that I've absorbed and taken on board, which is so not true, but we've chosen to take it on and become part of our narrative and part of our story. So if we don't like our identity in terms of it's not really serving me to get to the next level of what I want to do, and it could be as simple as I'm not an exerciser. If you want to be fit, we've got to change that narrative to I'm not a leader, or because I'm an extroverted personality, I'm too much, or all of these things. So we've got to actually sit there and go, okay, what does that look like for me? And who am I right now? And if I really want to get from this position here on, I'm currently a manager, but I'd like to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. What are some of the attributes that I need to learn about to get to that new identity that I'm forming for myself? And what does that look like and sound like and feel like? So that's the identity piece. And it's an evolution. Someone said to me, oh, I know you, Kylee. And I'm like, I haven't seen you in 15 years. I'm not even the same person I was 6 months ago, let alone 15 years ago. Nurturing is the emotional intelligence. It's that emotional agility. It's that pivot, that recalibration. And I really actually am loving at the moment Timothy R. Clark, who's very forward thinking on psychological safety, but he's actually added 2 extra pillars into emotional intelligence. We've got self-awareness and self-management, social awareness, social management, but he talks about self-regard and social regard. What do we think of ourselves and how does that drive how we show up? And then what are we thinking of the others? Because if you walk in the room and you think everybody in your team's lazy and incompetent, how do you show up into that conversation? You're going to manage that differently than if you show up with this unconditional positive regard that my job is to nurture this team moving forward. So that's the nurture. Fearlessness, it's about that whole idea is that we've got to move towards the storms rather than away from them. And there's that proverb around the water buffaloes that said water buffaloes have learned that the fastest way through something that they don't like is to run towards it. The cows run away from the storm, so they get caught up in the storm and they're stuck in it much longer. And in actual fact, it's about facing it and navigating it, and we'll get through the other side a lot faster. So fearlessness is not about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and still moving through it anyway.
I think all entrepreneurs must be water buffalo then.
Yeah. And people are like, oh my gosh, you just must not feel this. I'm like, we absolutely feel it 100% all the time.
Always being an entrepreneur is like getting punched in the face again and again and just going back for more and being like, let's do it again.
100%. 100%. There's a proverb that says fall down 7, get up 8. And I feel like I'm up to 700, get up 800 kind of thing. Single mum life is a kick in the guts. Working with kids that don't want to be at school, also not good for the ego, particularly at times. So if you can't tolerate a bit of that and navigating through those things, then you've got to keep moving forward. Yeah. Innovation is really important. And I think one of the things that we really talk about in that space is be the thermostat, not the thermometer. The thermostat drives the temperature of the room that you're walking in. You go in and you're guiding that temperature rather than reading the room and just going, oh my gosh, I feel like everybody's like, "Rrr." So I'm not going to share my idea. I'm not going to share this kind of stuff. And we know that in order to have innovation and creativity, we need to have vulnerability, which goes back to identity, nurturing, fearlessness. We've got to be able to have those conversations. So they all intertwine. They're all their own standalone pillars, but they all interplay to create this infinite model as well. And nobility is around the fact that the best thing that we can do when we're struggling with our own stuff is serve somebody else. And it doesn't take anything to help somebody else out. And a story I often tell is when I was at school, we had this swimming carnival. I had this young African refugee student who had a tumor in his brain, which affected the way he processed information. And we went to the swimming carnival and he's, I'm a really good swimmer. And I'm like, I'm not as confident. But hey, I'm all about empowerment. So let's do this. And he got called out into the middle lane of the swimming carnival. And in Australia, it's a 50-meter pool outdoors. So it's wide lanes. And I'm like, yeah, we're not doing the middle lane. We're going to come to the end lane. So lane one, my friend over here. And I said to the PE staff, I'm like, what happens if you can't swim? And they're like, in true Australian fashion,
She'll be right, mate.
Yeah, she'll be right, mate. That's how that rolls. He dove into the pool. I've never seen somebody sink like a rock the way that this kid did, right? And I'm looking at PE staff and they're looking at me. I'm like, damn it. I dive in. First and last time I wore a white shirt to a swimming carnival. I did get a cheer from the kids like up in the stadium when I got out. But anyway, well done, miss. Thanks very much. But in that moment, so imagine this kid's not feeling good about himself and he's panicking. So what he does is he gets my head and he's pushing me down further to try and rise himself up. And I think what happens is, and this links back to that nobility, is we've created this culture where in order to feel good about ourselves, we have to put somebody else down or we have to be negative to somebody else in this thing. And then I always think about those movies where someone's in the elevator shaft, there's people in the elevator shaft and they're stuck down the bottom and they've got to get out to the top or the mine shaft and they link backs and they link arms and they use their feet against the wall and they rise up and lift each other out. That's nobility, is I'm rising up and I can take you with me rather than in order to get myself up, I need to push you down. So that's where we look at compassionate leadership, ego-free leadership. We talk about servant leadership, and I think servant leadership's got a bit of a bad rap, but it's really about service to others. And in actual fact, rather than that model of servant that people can treat us poorly. And I think when we are of service to others, we will serve ourselves as well. But the nobility is the fact that we can rise together. It's not about me, it's about creating a both and.
Yeah. One of the main reasons I left corporate was just that vicious culture of backstabbing and always wanting to strive to do better than someone else and get the credit and all that sort of thing. I'm like, why can't we just do it together?
Yeah, I distinctly remember going into one of my supervisor's offices after a meeting and I went, next time you plan on throwing me under a bus for something that you directly asked me to do, could you at least give me the heads up? The next I is influence. How do we lack communication, psychological safety, all of those things that are so profound, yet I think like most things can be quite tokenistic and you don't do it right. So foundationally, in order to create influence, if I feel safe and supported by you, even to challenge your ideas, then I'm more likely to engage with you and you're more likely to be able to influence me into that conversation. So it seems there's been lots of commentary about it. And we know that if we implement it well, it's not a ticker box. But I think a lot of the time we still struggle to authentically embed these practices that are coming out as evidence-based practice because people think it's waffly and we think we won't get to the deadline. We won't improve that kind of idea. But we actually know that psychological safety is not the goal. The excellence is the goal. And the best way to do that is through having a strong psychological safety. Yeah. Transformation is about bringing everything together. That how are we transforming and what's that succession plan look like? And sustainability of our practices comes from not a one and done model, not that PD I went to once that was really good and then I got back to the office and nobody wants me to implement any of it. And what's that legacy look like? What's the outcome we're working towards, and how do we get there? And the last pillar is that ecosystem. What does that ecosystem of support around us look like? And how do we create this harmony? But we can create this beautiful ecosystem. And one of the stories I talk about is the word harmony. And I love music. I love all sorts of music. I'm very eclectic in my music tastes. But imagine this beautiful symphony that you're trying to create. And you've got your percussion, you've got your brass, you've got your woodwind. All of that's playing all of the time. But at some stage, something will take lead and they'll have a string solo or they'll have a woodwind solo. But like rock music, we can't have that solo go too long. That the guitarist that drank too much before the show and they just keeps going with the solo. But it's the same for work. Work can't play that really long solo forever. It needs to come back into the orchestra. It needs to come back into the symphony to create this perfect symphony. We need to have harmony with everything in our lives. And we can't play too fast, can't play too can't play too loud, can't play too soft, but we can have a solo for a little bit, whether it be work, whether it be family, whether it be health. All of these things might need to take a little bit of a solo to focus, but nothing stops in the background. It's not, I'm doing family and nothing else matters. Everything's still playing. It's just playing softer in the background. And then I'm going to bring that back in. I always think about creating that perfect harmony in that ecosystem, and we need all of it to exist at the same time in that harmonic phase. And then we have the right people around us in that ecosystem to make that happen. And we have to do audits on that. I don't know about yourself, but over time, the people that were in my ecosystem in my 20s aren't always in my ecosystem in my 40s because they've supported me in that phase of my life, but they can't support me here in that next phase of my journey. When I went into business, I didn't have people in my world that were business owners. So I needed to create a new ecosystem of myself so I could talk to somebody who knew what I was talking about and didn't look at me like I was crazy when I was saying that this was hard, because I had a secure government job for a very long time. And so whenever I talked about business being hard, everyone's, oh, do you think you made the right decision? Well, yeah, I did. But I need people go, oh yeah, it is really hard. Now what are we going to do? Rather than make me question my judgment about making this call. So they're the pillars, but every stage we can go back and you take on a new role. Do I need to look at my ecosystem right now? Do I need to look at that influence piece right now? Do I need to look at that or do I need to look at the bigger picture of what that looks like for me and how do I move through that? And our team this quarter is going to look at our influence. How are we influencing the marketing department, or how are we influencing this, or how are we influencing as an entrepreneur? Who are the people I need to get in front of to get to the next phase of my journey? And what communication style do I need for that? Because my communication preference may not be how to communicate with this particular audience to get me to the next level. So what do I need to recalibrate in that journey?
So we're constantly evolving as leaders, and the environment, especially on digital entrepreneurship, is so fast paced. It's ridiculous. 1 minute the algorithms is, the next it's that, and you can't get in front of the people like you could yesterday, and you're constantly having to reevaluate. What do you think are the keys to helping a leader to continually evolve? Is it this auditing system? Is it a series of things?
So one of the things that I really encourage people to do, you can do it daily, you can do it weekly, you can do it monthly, as much as you need. But even that audit of what went well for me today and how can I do more of that? Because we stop at what went well. We do our gratitude. I'm so grateful this happened to me today. Great. So how can I do more of that? Or what's not working? What do I need to change, reduce, or eliminate as part of my practice? What's really interesting when I'm coaching, people want to get to the not working stuff all of the time. And our brains are wired for negativity bias. We always want to go, oh, here's the problem over here. But in actual fact, if we focus on what's going on, how can we do more? We'll create a bit of a snowball effect. And going back to that infinite leadership model, it's that identity piece is staying grounded in who I am and staying the course with myself. Where am I going? And every time the algorithm changes, you can't sit there and go, oh my gosh, I'm a failure because the algorithm didn't work today, because you're questioning your identity and who you are all the time. And actually being grounded in knowing who you are and where you're going helps you stay calm in those storms and be the water buffalo and head towards it and go, this is just a new opportunity to learn a new way of how do I adapt and be agile to what the algorithm's doing now. So seeing it as a learning opportunity rather than seeing it as a barrier all of the time. Because you can get overwhelmed in digital space things are changing so much, you would constantly feel like a failure if every time something changed, you're like, oh my gosh, this is another thing that's happened to me. What's the opportunity here? And the other part of it is making sure you've got an ecosystem around you that's going to support you, because some people are ahead of the game of you. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So people that are ahead of the game, that's been really great for me in terms of being able to stay calm, because I'm surrounded by people that have weathered these storms before, and look, they're still standing. That's some confidence that with the right support in place, I too can still be standing and moving forward and evolving in that journey, and choosing and being really careful about what you consume. So we can't say there's lack of access to knowledge, there's lack of application of knowledge, and there's lack of access to discerning what's the right knowledge for me in this right moment. But again, if I've gone back through those infinite pillars that I'm confident in who I am and where I'm going, then I'll be able to discern, does this knowledge, this piece of information, do I want it? Is it helpful to me? Or can I leave that part right now, instead of trying to take it all on board or just getting burnt out by this information overload? Is about, does this work for me right now? And how do I navigate? And something that didn't work for you 5 years ago might come back and go, oh yeah, actually works for me now in my journey. And something that did work for you may not continue to work for you. So that constant auditing, evaluating, and constant evolution, and accepting that it's an ongoing process, I think saves the resentment. If you just accept now that this is an ongoing process and it will be continually ongoing, it's not a one and done model, then it saves a lot of resentment down the track.
Yeah. So we're talking about being committed to growth and learning. And from what I can hear so far, we got to be discerning, surround yourself with the right people, be careful about what you consume, apply the knowledge that you gather, continuously evaluate, look for the opportunity. Do we have anything else that you want to add into there about how we can stay committed to growing and evolving as a leader?
Yeah, I think one of the things I talk about with my clients is it's about theory into practice, right? So what do I need right now to take this theory that I have got, because we underestimate our own abilities, and what do I need to put it into practice? And I think that's part of it. And what's the gap here for me, and how do I close it, and who can help me close it? And so constantly looking at those things.
Yeah. How do you think that it's really important to be adaptable as a leader? I think it's fairly clear from our conversation as of now. How do you think that infinite leadership, that model, encourages continuous evolution?
Yeah, I think because once you start to understand who you are, like I know I have a healthier version of myself, the one that's in flow, that's going, that's really confident and all of these things. And other days, the version of myself is the unhealthier version of myself, where I'm second guessing everything. I'm still navigating that. And instead of beating myself up all of the time, I'm like, but I know what that healthy version of myself looks like now. So what do I need to pivot? What do I need to pivot back to that version of myself? That was one of the most powerful things that stopped that either I'm a good person or a bad person, is that I'm constantly flowing between this healthy version of myself and unhealthy version of myself. But the more I am aware to take that theory into practice and go, I actually know what I need right now to turn this around, that helps me be more agile. But it also means I'm more compassionate to myself. And it means that I've given myself more permission to go, that happened. What do I need to do now? Instead of getting stuck in, oh, this is who it is. And going back to Vossi's quote earlier, it can be man change. If I don't like my situation, I can change it. And I think we forget how much choice we have in this story because we give away our power so often. And so the infinite leadership model just keeps recalibrating the fact that we can walk into our own choices. Even in fearlessness, we can be the buffalo, we can be the emu, or we can be the cow that's running away, the emu that's got their head stuck in the sand and not attending to anything and is still stuck there. Well, we can be the person running away from that, like the cows, and it will catch up with us eventually. It usually does. So if we don't attend to these things, they usually take, I call it the emotional hijacking. You're going to have to face it. You can either consciously choose to deal with it, or you can unconsciously end up in that situation. But when you're consciously choosing, you feel more in control of those choices and you're walking in your own power rather than feeling powerless.
Yeah.
And that contributes you to feeling more open to being agile in that process.
Self-awareness is such an important part of being an impactful leader. You share with us your personal journey, perhaps, of self-awareness, because I know that as children, we are born self-aware and then we unlearn or we absorb the environment and the information around us, and we become conscious of what other people think of us and what our friends are doing and what we do and don't like and what mum and dad are thinking and saying and doing. And we lose that really strong connection to self. And then for a lot of us, it's a journey back to that. It's a remembering back to that.
If you'd asked me maybe 10, 15 years ago, if I was a really intuitive person, I probably would have said no. But what I've learned is I actually am really intuitive. I just didn't trust myself in that process. So I can tell you lots of stories where I'm like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. And I'm like,
Mhm.
whoa, why didn't I address it at the time? And it was about self-trust in that
Yeah.
process. And one of the things that I think social media has been really great at is around building awareness that it's actually okay to talk about your feelings and all those kind of stuff. But I think there's a false positive that the more self-awareness you could do, sometimes you can have this sense that you're more aware and you don't have days of blind spots that you're going to pick it up all the time. So I think we have to equally understand that we're aware, but equally understand we still have blind spots where we're not aware. And I think
Yeah.
the biggest challenge for people now, like social media talks about all the feels all the time. You only have to go on TikTok. I call it TTD. I call it the TikTok diagnosis. I actually think maybe in the new DSM we'll see the TTD, the TikTok diagnoses where people have diagnosed. And I have clients that go, do this. I'm like, no, you don't. Part of it is self-awareness is one thing. Self-management is where you implement it. It's all, I'm feeling this way because I'm feeling really frustrated. Great. I really love that you've acknowledged how you're feeling, but that actually doesn't give you a free pass on treating people like crap. So there's more than one part to self-awareness. We've got to understand there's multiple paths. And for me, I have had 2 marriages, and my second marriage ended in domestic violence and having to move through a really horrific circumstance. And whilst his behavior is his responsibility, and I absolutely do not take on board his choices that he made, one of the things that I had to take responsibility for, what was going on for me, that I was attracting a kind of person that would feel that behavior was okay. And part of it was people pleaser, lacking confidence in self, even though I come across as a really confident person, feeling really insecure, feeling unworthy of love, all of that kind of stuff. So that was, oh my gosh. So I need to attend to this now. So I was now self-aware that these were the reasons I kept falling into those patterns, because those type of people will find people that feel vulnerable and make you feel like the best thing, and then they'll turn that around. But now what am I going to do about that? The now what question came up for me now. So what was the piece of work that I needed to do and take responsibility for? Not his behavior, but what did I need to take responsibility for? And also equally, what did I want my children growing up and navigating? Did I want them to sit there and go, you should not feel confident about yourself? Or did I want them to feel confident in their self-worth? What was I modeling? And how could I continue to model this? If you don't like your circumstances, you've got the power to change it, whether that be in your personal life or your professional life. And so that continued driver for these self-awareness conversations. And in actual fact, my son is in year 12 at the time of this recording, and he did a presentation for his English on men's mental health and men's suicide. And his teacher was so traumatized because he was so articulate in it. And I'm like, did you actually just tell her that we have a really open home and we talk about a lot of this stuff? Because she's like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And because I realized by my own self-awareness journey, and many of people my generation didn't grow up with parents that knew how to do these conversations either. And that's not their fault. They learned from their parents and they learned from their parents. So if I wanted to change this trajectory and I wanted to have kids that felt confident of themselves and was able to articulate what was going on for them, I needed to model that. So we've had a lot more open conversations around those kind of things and destigmatize a whole heap of things, which meant that my son, this was pretty normal. How do we navigate? What do we need to do proactively about mental health? And why is this an issue for men? And what is the repercussions of men not attending to their mental health? Domestic violence, blah, 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 all of these things. So that was a very normalized conversation for him because we've had open conversations. His teacher wasn't aware. So she's like, oh my goodness, here. So my own self-awareness journey has come from also wanting to model a good practice for the people around me to be able to have those conversations, because I learned, and Marianne Williamson has this quote that says, once you give yourself permission, you inadvertently give permission for others to do the same.
I love that type of leadership with vulnerability. And those women really did lead the way. Marianne Williamson, Brene Brown, they had some fantastic insights into that.
Yeah.
And I point out that it does take courage to break the cycle of what your parents modeled and how you were modeled as a child, but somebody has to do it along the way. And that in itself is a type of leadership. And it's not easy to do, especially if it's never been modeled to you. So my question then becomes, what tools did you deploy or did you learn from a personal toolkit to help navigate those situations and help you get more self-love, help you become more confident, help you become more articulate in what was and was not okay, setting boundaries?
Yeah. So that's what the infinite leadership model absolutely is about. The fact that I realized that my own personal journey was of leadership. I was a leader in my family and everything like that. And I took the lessons of leadership that I'd learned that I felt were really powerful and implemented it into my own personal life. I have had to learn self-compassion because I'm always pretty hard on myself. But I also just go back to Glennon Doyle has a quote in her book, Untamed, and it says, my children don't need me to save them. They need to watch me save myself. And I'm like, knife through the heart stuff. I don't want my children, when they're frustrated, to be yelling at me as a parent and taking it out on me. Then what am I modeling? And one of the biggest things I don't think we model very well as parents or as leaders is the repair. Once something's gone wrong, how do you circle back and sit down and go, hey, mate, I really didn't like how I showed up in that conversation. Can we please have a do-over? And can I explain why that I felt the way that I did?
Yeah.
And so what I did is I'm like a bit of a sponge. I'm really nerdy. I'm at my home office today, but if you were at my other office, you would just see this whole bookcase full of books. And I absorbed, and it's not about one particular methodology. I'm like very eclectic. So I'm like, oh, I like this from here. And I like this from here. And oh, thank you. I'll take one of those. And I'll take one of those. And I applied it to what that looked like for me. But that self-compassion piece, particularly when you're a high performer, is really difficult. And I think Marianne Williams' quote around the permission piece, Kristen Neff does a lot on self-compassion. Brene Brown does a lot on permission. And when you do her Dare to Lead program, the first thing you do is a little permission slip. What do I need to give myself permission to do to show up today? And it can just be so simplistic. And I think that's the other thing we do. We overcomplicate everything. What's something little I can do? What do I need to give myself permission to do today to go back and edit my book that's coming out in December? What do I need to do to give myself permission today when I didn't sleep through the night because my kid was up, but I've got my clients coming? What do I need to give myself permission to do today to show up to be the best version of myself? Doesn't take very much. And the more we practice, like all of this stuff, Infinite Model is about a reflective practice, but we have to build the muscle. It only works if we practice. My son is an excellent football player. He got good at it. It's because he loved it and practiced it. But I often say to him, do you love it because you're good at it? Or did you get good at it because you love it? And the reason is because you practice all the time, you got better, which meant that you loved it even more. So it's a bit like talking about your emotions. My daughter says to me, you're more comfortable at that. I'm like, I absolutely was not. I was like the anti-comfortable talking about emotions. But the more I practiced, the better I got at it and the more okay I got with it. So I wasn't having this massive visceral reaction every time I had to have that conversation. So now I can hold space for those conversations, not only for myself, but for others as well. But like everything, it's a practice that we work through.
Absolutely. Now, what advice would you give to aspiring leaders or leaders who are in the middle of their journey? We're all in the middle of our journey. Who want to adopt this infinite leadership kind of approach or mindset. Where would we even start for identity?
So the way that I've written the infinite model is that you can address any pillar at any stage, but I always recommend you start with identity. You might go through like concept of false positive. Oh, yeah, I'm really good at that. I'm really good at that. And my question is, how do you know? You might think you're doing a really good job of it, but make sure you've checked in with a safe person around what do I do well here and what do I need to improve on? Or I might be doing well in this particular role, but to get to the next level, what are the skills that I need and how can I be continuing to work on that? But I always say start with identity. Who am I right now? Am I showing up as a version of myself? What are the things that are hijacking me along the way? When I get really tired, I get really fatigued, which means I'm actually quite rigid and I'm not flexible in problem solving. What do I need to do about that? Do I need to address my sleep strategy? Do I need to practice some regulation? Do I need to notice when I'm feeling inflexible? Do I need to have a safe person that I feel confident enough to say, hey, Kylee, hey, I noticed you weren't being very flexible today. Is everything okay? What are the things that I need? Because having tools in your toolbox is about having lots of tools that you can pull out and try. And I often joke with my younger clients, I'm like the Mary Poppins of strategies. how she pulls these things out of her bag, but she never runs out.
Yes.
I'm like that for strategies. If you're stuck somewhere and you've tried something and you're like, oh, I've tried everything. I'm like, but have you? And it's really about trying it on like a shirt. Do you try it on? Does it fit? Does it feel too tight? Is it got a scratchy tag that's going to irritate you? Then take it off and let's put in another one.
Yeah.
But it's about having lots of tools in there. And we will always have tools that are quite maladaptive. Like we'll have the blow up or we'll have the withdrawal. We'll have this tool. But that's because we only repeat behaviors that we perceive keep us safe. And it's not about taking that away. It's about putting enough tools on top of it that we've almost got to pull it out to get to that one. So we've tried 10 other tools before we got there. And usually one of them along the way will be more useful and less damaging than that particular tool. So it's about putting tools in that toolbox for yourself to continue to move through that journey and getting support along the way. One of the reasons I became a coach was that coaching was one of the most transformational experiences for me. I'd done lots of leadership PDs and I'd done lots of things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if you make me go to one more training, I think I'm going to hurt myself. And then coaching became about me and what I needed for me to evolve. And how did I got these skills? How am I applying them to get a better outcome? And how am I innovating myself? How am I influencing? How am I going through that transformation? The infinite model is like a holistic model. It constantly continues to evolve to meet you where you're at and get you to the next level.
And I know you work a lot with teams and organizations, but I just wanted to put something in there for us smaller organizations. I think one of the key things that I've done as the leadership of my team now, I've got currently 14 people in the publishing company. But I have some people in there, and this is part of the onboarding process. I tell them I don't know everything. I'm good at some things, but I will always miss something, especially if I've had 2 hours sleep. And they have full permission to give me their insights and things because I don't know everything. So I sent my EA this big thing for one of our anthology projects that I'd written up. I was like, oh my God, it's so good. I'm so happy with myself. And or if I skip, and she sends back this Slack message that this is great, but I think we should add in this and this. And I was like, my ego was so annoyed for about 30 minutes. And then I was like, no, she has a point. And I asked her, okay, what do you see the benefits of this being versus what we already have? And she explained it to me. And I was like, I'm going to think about this because my ego was still pissed off. And she knows me now because I'm like this big visionary and I'm like, just get it done, just do it. And I came back like, actually, you have a really good point. It's delegate it to the graphics team and get that happening. So it's so important to surround yourself with different people with different viewpoints and who feel safe enough to communicate to you your blind spots where you may not see them.
I think that's the epitome of psychological safety. So her contribution is valued. You valued her contribution and she could actually challenge your thought process. And even though it was uncomfortable, you could sit with it and come back to that situation. So challenge of safety. And I think that's the other thing that you just mentioned was around those diverse perspectives. The best teams have a diverse lens. Where teams fall down is we haven't actually articulated how to communicate through this diversity, or we haven't learned our conflict resolution styles, or we haven't perfected how to give and receive feedback for those different lenses. And that's where things fall down because diversity in and of itself is brilliant. And one of my most powerful female leaders that I ever had said, do not employ in your likeness, because if everyone thinks like you and sounds like you, you'll get things done, but you won't get to where you need to go.
I love that. I feel like that needs to go on like a t-shirt or a motivational post.
But the most challenging part about that is that's uncomfortable for you at times, because if I work with people that think like me, then I actually don't need to explain everything. I don't need to unpack it because they just get it. But I'm not going to get the innovation because there's no challenge. There's no growth because nothing's being challenged. We're all just going along as the status quo. But you have to do the work around that. And I actually did, one of the things I do in my identity pillar is a tool that I love to use. And I did it in this leadership team. And everyone was so very, very different. And one of the things we came back to is, what did you learn about yourself through this journey? And what is your communication preference? And people are like, I like the bullet point. Just send me the bullet point. And other people are like, no, just come up and talk to me. And other people are like, I like to write a very considered email, right? Everyone's got different preferences. So if something's important to you, how would you like someone to approach you? But this came through understanding yourself first instead of the bullet person that needs to explain things is very difficult. And it can be quite offensive and affronting. But even in a conversation with my son one time, I said to him, I'd like to suggest to you that you do this thing. And he goes, is it optional? And I'm like, absolutely not. Because when you make it sound optional and then I don't do it, then you get mad at me. He goes, I'd rather you just say, do the thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, it sounds so affronting for me. But the outcome I wanted was for him to do this thing. So why not communicate it in the way that he needed? So I had to adjust my style, which was understanding myself, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so confronting for me. And he's like, can you just tell him, like, just don't make it optional. Don't make it sound like I've got a choice when I actually don't. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And that was one of those realizations around how often as leaders do we present something in a style with this intention of one way and it's not received the way we intended, then it causes this disconnect because he sees the world through a different lens. And that's not wrong. It's just different. And that completely changed the way that I parent, completely the way it changed that I led by understanding that diversity piece around how the lens in which we view the world. And I had worked in diversity for 20 years and I'd seen it through that lens. And I did it all of the time in that world, but I hadn't always picked it up into my leadership space because I'm like, oh, we're all in leadership. We should all do it this way. And it was when I implemented this additional piece going, well, you could have the same diagnosis and see the world differently. And I need to adjust in it. If I want you to do this thing, then I need to adjust it this way. So I just started implementing the same. What does that look like for you? How would you like me to give you that information? What do I need to adapt in the agility piece as a leader? Because then you're modeling for them also that they're going to be, you know, the way I communicate to you, Tarryn, might be different to the way I communicate to Mary or someone like that, because we actually need information provided in different ways. And it's actually a really good practice as a leader because when you employ and you're like this, you don't really have to think about it. But when you have to articulate to somebody who has a different lens to us, it actually makes you think through the thing that you're talking about. And being able to explain it to somebody else actually elevates your influence and your leadership.
I think it's so important for leaders to understand the people that they're leading because they are so unique individual. They're not just a bunch of sheep that have no feelings or robots or whatever it is. Part of my onboarding process for my team, I ask them, like, what is your communication style? I have to tell you something. Do you want the bullet points? Do you want the story? Do you need a visual? Do you need a voice note? Do you want a Slack message? How would you like that? And on top of that, I also ask how they like to be rewarded. Some people want extra days off. Some people want a thoughtful gift sent to their home. So I do ask them those questions because I think that makes them feel seen and heard as an individual, which is so important and something I think that corporate especially has done very, very badly to date.
And I also think part of that managing up is understanding your communication style. If they need to influence up and get that change happening, then what do they need to know? I think lead where you're at. So whilst you may have the title of leader, if you treat everybody in your organization as a leader, what do I need to do to influence up here? I've got to influence to my peers. I've got to influence to those around me, not just understanding their style. Because one of the things that leaders often report back to me is how isolated and lonely they feel because they're doing this for others. But how do we create a model of care and compassion in our organizations where it doesn't matter what position you are, you can actually demonstrate care and compassion for the leader as much as the leader demonstrates care and compassion for you?
I love that. I've never heard it explained like that before, but it makes so much sense because leaders are human too. And it can be a very lonely journey at the top. Human people, especially as women, we're not only holding that for our teams, but we're also holding that for our family because we are emotional and we are nurturing and businesses can be very masculine. Sometimes all it takes is a little kind word from somebody to get you like back in your zone, back in alignment and flowing again.
I think as women and leaders, we've had to fight so hard to get where we are that we want to give this persona that we don't need that. But I also think men do it as well. But everybody needs encouragement and everybody needs a reminder. And just because you're the leader doesn't mean that if someone gives you a compliment, that's not a sign of weakness. And leaders will often say to me, people don't know how hard it is. We sometimes look at people ahead of us in leadership positions and go, oh my gosh, they don't feel this. And I'm like, 100% we do.
Comparison as well, where you're like, is so much smarter than me. And this happens in the digital space all the time. You're like, oh, they're so much more successful than me because people aren't showing the messy bit.
Yeah. And comparison's the thief of joy. We compare ourselves to others. But we've also got to remind ourselves that as leaders, we have to model that way. Because if we want our staff to be able to communicate with us authentically, then are we communicating authentically back? That's the best way to get those things happening on the board. And in order to create safe spaces, we need to be safe spaces, but also we need to model that so that just because they're under us in the hierarchy or the org chart, they can still, psychological safety is an everybody responsibility. It's not just a leadership responsibility. So what do they bring that contribute to that? And the part of that is, did I tell them what I needed?
Yeah, taking responsibility for that communication piece. Now, you mentioned at the very start of our conversation that success looks different for everybody, and I couldn't agree more. What does success look like for you as a leader?
I think it's evolving because I think when I first started out my business, I had an idea of what success looks like. And because I've changed my ecosystem, those possibilities have changed and those opportunities have changed for me. And I think I was, again, to quote Marianne Williamson, "Your playing small does not serve the world."
Mhm.
And I think I had been limiting myself. And I was having a conversation with someone just recently, and they said, "What's your biggest challenge in business?" And I'm like, "Me, I'm my own biggest challenge in business." And I thought 100% because it's my brain that decides if I'm going to play small or I'm going to play big. And that comes to my confidence. It comes to how I'm feeling about myself. And it comes to all of these different things. So my definition of success has changed. But one thing that doesn't ever change is moving forward. If I'm in a difficult situation, would I know how to navigate through that? Have I also raised children that are not going to be limited by their age or what somebody else has bestowed upon them? That's another definition of success for me. As a single parent, I got myself a new couch. That was so exciting for me.
I myself a new couch and I've never been happier.
I know. It's so lovely. I'm like, get off the couch. Don't touch the couch.
Just not your couch.
Even from when I went from where I was, where it was every penny counted, to now I'm in a position where I don't have to count every penny. That's a progressive success for me. That's an ongoing thing. So freedom to be able to choose those opportunities for myself and the freedom to be the infinite leader that I aspire to be able to go, this is aligned for me right now. I'm going to choose to go down this pathway, or being able to recognize, have that awareness of self to go, yeah, that's actually not aligned for me. And because when you start out in business, I'm sure we've all been there, saying no to things is like, I can't say no because I need the money, I'm starting out and all this kind of stuff. So that success is being able to say no to things that are no longer in alignment with where I want to go. So I know that's a strange definition of success, but being able to say no to things and to choose to say yes to things is one of my definitions of success. Being able to take opportunities that are presented to myself. There's some tangible things that I think I would love to have. But when I was a single mum and I had to sell my house and I had to go back into the rental market after being a homeowner and everything, I had to reconcile. So again, infinite is this ongoing recalibration. I really focused on providing my children opportunities, going on a holiday together versus what we traditionally grew up in is the only way that you're successful is to have a mortgage and to have a house and everything. And I have redefined that definition of success for me because I moved to the schooling where I am because I wanted my children to go to the best school. That was success for me, being able to pick up and move rather than, yes, having a house is lovely. And I certainly do not begrudge anyone having a house. And I think security is important. But creating my definition of safety and security has been a new success model for me. And being able to create the strategies and the tools to create that safety for myself and also that recalibration along the way. So success is happy, healthy, fulfilled, freedom for myself and those that I love and care about.
That is amazing. I love everything that you have taught me today. You've taught our listeners. Thank you so much. Now, we have a tradition here on the podcast called the book drop, obviously. What book would you recommend to our viewers and listeners that has either changed or impacted your personal or business life in some way?
Yeah. So not including my own book that's coming out in December, the book Insight by Tasha Eurich, self-awareness. So on the front cover, I think there's been a version come out that's upgraded, but the very first version I got was this little kitten and this tiger. And it was this reflection mirror of self. And so she tells a lot about that self-awareness journey. She talks about boundaries. She talks about feedback. And she talks about people that in your world, there are unloving critics. So people that are going to find fault in everything that you do. You've also got uncritical lovers that are going to find no fault in whatever you do, that you're like, oh, I'm totally going to take that person out. And that person's like, oh yeah, no, they totally deserve it. Not help you make good decisions sometimes. And then she talks about the loving critics, the people that want you to be the best version of yourself, so that are going to be your supporters, but equally call you out on things to move yourselves forward. And one of the things that I would take that a step further is I really encourage people in their journey to be their own loving critic, not to be that uncritical, unloving critic, because we're so harsh on ourselves. That's probably a natural position for most of us. none of us are particularly uncritical lovers where we sit there and go, oh my God, I'm so amazing all the time. We don't tend to fall into that category. We tend to be the unloving critics of ourselves all the time. But I would really encourage people. And the other really cool insight that she said, which I knew, but it was really great to solidify, was even when you get feedback, you actually have a choice about whether you choose to use it or not.
Everything's a choice.
100%.
Now, talk to me about your own book, which is coming out. And please, can I have a signed copy?
Yes, absolutely. So it's coming out in December. And what we're talking about is infinite leadership, driving continuous improvement culture to create excellence for everyone. And I think that it's not about one person, going back to the kid in the pool. It's not about me being better. It's about how do we rise up together through that infinite leadership model. So I'm so excited. We're going to start pre-orders in the next couple of weeks and the book will be released in December.
Brilliant. Now, I'm going to pop all of Kylie's contact information and socials and all of those fun things in the show notes. So be sure to go and hang out with her, support her book launch, get on those pre-orders, because this conversation alone has been amazing. Imagine what a book could do. Kylee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Tarryn, thank you so much. And I do hope that tonight's sleep is infinitely more helpful than last night's.
Look, the only way it could potentially get worse is 1 hour or no sleep. So I'm hopeful. I remain ever hopeful.
And going back to my music lover, there's a song, The Only Way Is Up.
Or I could just book myself into a mental asylum where I could just have some time out.
I'd spend a quiet room.
Please admit me. Thank you, Kylie. We'll be speaking again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Tarryn. And I've absolutely adored this conversation and I adore what you're doing for your community as well. And I just love these. I get so energized by this synchronicity of finding leaders that are doing amazing things. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a wrap on today's episode. If you love the insights and inspiration, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe to stay connected and turn your visions into reality alongside our community of changemakers. I'm Tarryn Reeves. Thank you for joining me. And remember, your story has power. See you in the next episode.